Good evening and welcome everybody to our webinar tonight. We are going to be talking about COVID, just a bit of an update again from our presentation that we did 2 weeks ago. And for those of you that missed that presentation, then you can easily see that. You'll be able to get a link to that on the blog and on our website. And then we will also replay this for you, so you'll have an opportunity to watch this again. So if you did miss last week's or the week before, please log in and see that presentation. All right, so what we're going to start with, I'm just going to share my screen. I'm hoping that everybody can see me and hear me okay. Don't forget, we'll have time for questions at the end, and there's some good, new, exciting information that we can learn from tonight's presentation. So, as we said, COVID-19, it has been, it is top of mind for everybody, and the very nature of this is changing, and we've seen the difference between the effects that it's had in China versus Italy and now in the US. And I think the really interesting thing is that it has mutated, and the difference between what we're seeing in the US is not the same as what we saw in Italy, where it predominantly affected the elderly and those people with comorbidities. But what we're seeing in the US strain is that it is indiscriminately affecting any age and not necessarily any comorbidities. And I think the scary thing is that it is killing 14% of the frontline workers in the hospitals, and they're young, fit, on the whole, nurses and doctors that are being affected by it. So it is ever changing. We are, a step behind, probably more like a month and a half behind the US, I would say at this point. And so I think we have to take this seriously. And for many of you that, we've been talking about this for some time now, and we always said we didn't think it all added up in terms of what we were being told. And I think what we're starting to realize now is that we were not told the truth from the beginning, neither was the rest of the world from China. So I think it is a very scary virus in that it is indiscriminately affecting many people. And sure, some people don't get the symptoms as much as others, but I think there's lots that we can do to prepare ourselves to at least, most of the medical information is, stay at home. If you get symptoms, then, you basically stay there, isolate yourself and hope for the best. But I think what we learned the last presentation is there is a lot we can do, and I think we can be very, very preventative. So again, we'll just run through for those that missed it. What is COVID-19? What are the key signs and symptoms? Just recap the previous strategies that we discussed, but then we're going to look at new information and where we go from here and how we can further support you. So the coronavirus, there have been many coronaviruses throughout our history, but since 2003, at least 5 new human coronaviruses have been identified, and they all have the same symptoms in that they are acute respiratory syndrome coronaviruses, and they do cause significant morbidity and mortality. The coronavirus disease 2019, which is a version 2 of SARS, is a respiratory illness that can spread from person to person. And as I've just said, it started out in Wuhan in China, but what we are seeing is, according to the experts, a significant mutation of the virus, and that's why we're seeing different symptoms and the effects on younger people. And I think the first child in the UK died yesterday at 5 years of age. So it is not true that it cannot affect children. because we've seen that very clearly in the UK that this child was affected. And I think also the other thing we have to consider is most of the infections that we have in Australia have come from the US. So it looks likely that we are getting the US version of this because it came in via the boats, and most of those were US boats, and it also came via people traveling overseas. So definitely we do need to be cautious, and we definitely need to be preventative as we possibly can. We can't be blasé, and we can't sit back and say this isn't going to affect us, because what we're seeing in the US is it is indiscriminately affecting people of all ages and perfectly fit and healthy people. This was just a bit of a look at previous pandemics, and you can see, back in the 1855s, we had the plague that killed 12 million people. We had the Spanish flu that killed 40 to 50 million people. AIDS that killed 25 to 35 million people. And then in the 50s, we had the Asian flu that killed 1.1, the Hong Kong flu that killed 1 million people. And then the coronaviruses, the MERS, the SARS, killed 770,000, swine flu, 200. And COVID, at the time that this chart was done, 14,500 people on March 23. And obviously that is ongoing. Now, I guess this gives us a bit of an indication. 2 weeks ago, when we did this presentation, there were 379,080 cases worldwide. There are now 1,097,810. So in 2 weeks, we have jumped significantly in cases. So too in the deaths, there were 16,524. We're now looking at 59,140. Of those, we've had 102,400 recover, but now we're looking at more of 250,000 people who have recovered, which is good news. But you can see that the cases by country are just exponentially increasing, and many of those are now coming out of the US. So signs and symptoms. And again, this is changing, but predominantly what we do know is that the first symptoms are fever, tiredness, fatigue, and a dry cough. Some say, and we can add to this list, conjunctivitis, typical flu, aches and pains, runny nose, sore throat, diarrhea, and nausea. Now, it is at this point that we should be making concerted effort to jump onto those symptoms immediately. If all we've got is a dry cough and a sore throat, that's great. We can get onto that really quickly, really easily. And in many of the instances we're seeing with our patients that we believe have it, they are recovering quite quickly. I think you really do need to be proactive, and the first sign and symptom, you need to be jumping onto this. Now, interestingly, it does affect the respiratory system, as we said. It is an acute respiratory syndrome. And according to Professor John Wilson, who's the president-elect of the RACGP, which is the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, and he's also a respiratory physician, he is saying that there are 4 categories of people catching this. 1, those that are subclinical, so have the virus, but they actually don't have any symptoms. And as we saw a week ago, one of the gentlemen that came off the boat, I think it was last Friday, he came off the boat where the 3,000 people came off. He had absolutely no symptoms, but he died of pneumonia 5 days later. Now, there's not a lot we can do about that if we know that we have absolutely no symptoms. There are some people that get mild symptoms. So they get the upper respiratory tract infection, they get a fever and cough, maybe headache, maybe conjunctivitis. The third subgroup are those that are positive for COVID-19. So they may present to hospitals, they may go to surgeries, and they do have flu-like symptoms that keep them off work. And so they go home, they have a typical flu, maybe a little bit worse than the flu. But again, there's a lot that we can do once we have that flu. And as I said last time, you know, from a herbal medicine perspective, we are exceptionally lucky in that we have many great antiviral herbs. But the medical system, you know, when you go to a doctor and you say, I have the flu, there's not really a lot that they can do with a flu. Bacteria, great, absolutely fantastic. We've got antibiotics for any serious bacterial infections, but not for the flu. There's not a lot that a doctor can give you for the flu. But for viruses and our herbal medicine support, we've got some absolutely amazing antiviral herbs. Now, the fourth category, according to Professor John Wilson, are those that get the severe illness that features pneumonia. And in Wuhan, that was 6% of the population. What we don't know from the US cases at the moment is what percentage of the population are getting the severe symptoms. We do know that 14% of the frontline nurses and doctors are dying of the disease. Therefore, we could probably say it's in the vicinity of 14% of the population. So essentially, it has more than doubled the people who are getting the severe illness. Now, how does that happen? Well, the problem is the infection reaches the respiratory tree and that becomes injured. It then causes inflammation, which irritate the nerves in the lining of the airway. And the infection goes past the lining to what we call the gas exchange units, which are at the end of the passages. And when that happens, they become infected. They pour out this inflammatory material into the air sacs. The lungs become filled with it, and this is what causes the pneumonia. Now, some of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight are the things that we can do if you do get a severe case. I mean, obviously, if you've got trouble breathing, shortness of breath, and there's any concern, you have got to present to hospital. However, if you do have the positive COVID-19, let's say you're any of those first three levels, then you need to do everything that you can to reduce inflammation. And I would say, even in the last section, reducing inflammation and protecting the lungs is the most important thing that we can do as a preventative. And if you or anyone that you know has a susceptibility to pneumonia, a susceptibility to bronchitis, a susceptibility to coughs, then we should be giving them preventative mixes now to at least support the lung tissue and reducing inflammation, because that's going to be incredibly important. It's the inflammation that we need to tackle, because that is what is causing the problem with this inflammatory material pumping into the lungs and basically filling them up. And therefore they become stiff and rigid and they don't work. That's why they can't breathe. So for the 16 to 20% of symptomatic patients who eventually need ICU care, it is difficult to predict, he said, this is the professor, referring to the percentage of those hospitalised who will need critical care. Patients who go into the intensive care unit and need ventilators are more likely to have lung damage and to develop acute respiratory distress syndrome. And that's, as we said, the fluid collects in the lung. Based on experience from SARS and MERS, some patients then go on to develop lung fibrosis. So that's this stiffening of the lungs. And it may then cause a 20 to 30% reduction in lung function afterwards, because the lung becomes scarred. And so this is way worse than SARS and MERS in terms of the infection. So way more people are getting it, and it's happening way quicker. And it hasn't been controlled well. I mean, who knows what might have happened if the Chinese authorities had actually let everybody know early that there was a potential problem. Maybe we could have avoided all this, but I think what they're saying is that for 16 to 20% of people that actually do end up with that stage 4, the more severe, they may have ancillary lung issues, and sometimes it will never clear, but they're saying that it could take years and years to recover. The other thing that you would have read a lot in the last few days is that it can cause heart damage. Now, the reason is that the virus piggybacks onto what we call ACE2 receptors. So these are receptors, they have a very high affinity for the heart. ACE2 receptors basically serve as the entry point for the virus, and because these receptors are very high in the heart, it exposes the heart to more damage. And a study from China came out to say that 20% of patients developed an injury to the heart during hospitalization. And this is why, because these ACE2 receptors that the virus is jumping onto to get access and entry point into the body, they're going straight to the heart. So another study found that 7.2% of patients developed acute cardiac injury. Now, the thing that's interesting, and I watched an interview last night with the CSIRO that are doing this vaccination, or at least attempting to coordinate the vaccinations around the world. So there's 3, Oxford University, Queensland University, and I can't remember the third one, but there's 3 universities that are through the CSIRO doing a clinical trial. So at the moment they're ready, and we will talk about it because someone asked about vaccinations. But what the interesting thing about this is they are targeting, or one of those trials is targeting ACE inhibitors. So what basically they're going to put the antidote or the vaccination, they're attaching it to ACE inhibitors. So I thought that was really interesting. So the question then is, there's been reports that are those people taking ACE inhibitors and ARBs, which are to reduce high blood pressure, are they more susceptible to the infection, and do they get a more severe form of the disease? And the initial studies are saying, yes, they do, because these ACE inhibitors upregulate ACE2 expression in the heart. So they're actually creating more of these ACE2 receptors so that the virus can piggyback more and make its way into the body. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to stop their blood pressure medication, but I think it's definitely worth a conversation with your doctor as to whether or not that is a wise thing to do. I have got a lot of references here, so we will upload the PDF version of this. So if any of you want to actually click on and read these references, you can have a look. So I guess the question mark is, and this is why they're saying people with comorbidities, so people with other conditions, are more likely to get a more severe form of the disease. And this is one of the mechanisms as to why. So most people who have cardiovascular disease will be on either an ACE inhibitor or an ARB to control their blood pressure. And these are the people that seem to be getting I guess that level 4 of the disease. Now, interesting, very interesting paper. Again, we'll give you this so you can read it if you'd like to. But it talked about COVID-19 specifically, and this is a paper that came out of the China. It hasn't been published. It's for pre-publication, which means it's almost about to be published. And they specifically have looked at the case of COVID-19 in China, and they have looked at herbal medicine, because as you know, herbal medicine is very big in China and a lot of the Asian countries. And so they said that therapies act on coronavirus in 4 ways. The first one is we really want to prevent the virus RNA synthesis and replication. We want to stop the virus replicating. So how do we do that? Well, it's this PL-PRO inhibitors that are essential for correcting virus replication. Now, interestingly, and we said we've got a lot of beautiful herbs, but Scutellaria bacalensis, Camellia sinensis, which is green tea, Vitis vinifera, Andrographis, rosemary, and magnolia are the 6 herbs that they identified that did this first step really well. They actually have a really good ability to attach to these PL-PROs and stop the replication, stop the virus RNA synthesis and replication. So that's great news. We've got 6 herbs here that have been categorically shown to help reduce the virus replicating. The second thing they identified is that we want to block the virus binding to human cell receptors. And for any of you that have done any reading, you'll keep seeing this spike protein. It's talked about a lot, and it's the spike protein that seems to be the main structural protein of the coronavirus. So what they want to do is block this spike protein because it's what binds to the host cell receptors to get the virus invasion. Now, interestingly, again, 4 very good herbs actually managed to block this spike protein. Licorice was one. Scutellaria bacalensis, which is Bacal skullcap, managed to do it. Hesperidin. Now, normally you will see vitamin C mixed with hesperidin. It is a flavonoid like quercetin, and we talked about quercetin last week or the week before. So hesperidin, Scutellaria bacalensis, and licorice, and Vitis vinifera also managed to do this. The third thing is they wanted to be able to inhibit the virulence factor to enable the person's host immunity to kick back in and do what it should do. Again, we see products with antibacterial and anti-inflammatory effects exhibiting high binding affinity to target proteins. So the 3 that did it again, Scutellaria bacalensis, it's considered like it is such an amazing herb. Vitex or Vitexin from Vitex negundo, not the same as Vitex that we use in fertility, and Andrographis. Now, interestingly, if any of you have my immune formula that we are giving immune and antiviral, it has the Scutellaria bacalensis in it, it has licorice in it, and it also has astragalus in it that we talked about last time. The 4th thing that you want to do is act on these specific receptors. So like we said, spike and a lot of the others, these herbs that we've talked about all manage to have some sort of effect on these receptors. And we've talked about ACE2 in one of the trials for the vaccine. They're going to be working on ACE2. Another one is going to be working on the spike protein. So they're all trying to do many different things, but and we heard last time that quercetin actually manages to work on the helicase. So that's the proliferation again of this virus. So we have some really, really good strategies that we can use to at least, not that we're necessarily going to completely get rid of it, but what we can do, I believe, is work on very different levels and protect us as much as we possibly can. Because if we end up in the situation like the US has found themselves, and we hope that this social isolation and everything else is going to put us in good stead. But the US is talking about, at best, 200,000 people dead, at worst, 1 to 2 million people dead. So if we end up in that same situation, we have to do everything we possibly can. The best thing is obviously to isolate ourselves. Don't be complacent. Make sure you're completely vigilant about washing your hands and staying away from anyone that may be sick and not infecting other people. But I think we've got to have these strategies in place so that the second we have a symptom, this is what we do. So this and another very interesting paper that I found was talking about melatonin. And it said the evidence suggests that excessive inflammation, oxidation, and an exaggerated immune response very likely contribute to COVID-19 pathology. This then leads to a cytokine storm. Basically, that means an upregulation of inflammatory markers and subsequent progression to acute lung injury. Now, melatonin is a well-known anti-inflammatory and antioxidant molecule. We use it now in cancer therapies. It's such a great antioxidant. It is protective against acute respiratory distress syndrome caused by viral and other pathogens. It is protective against acute respiratory distress syndrome. How awesome is that? It's effective in critical care patients by reducing the vessel permeability, anxiety, sedation use, and improving sleep quality. And it shows that it's beneficial for better clinical outcomes for COVID-19 patients. It also has a high safety profile, which means it can't really cause too many side effects. And this is significant data showing that melatonin limits virus-related diseases and would likely be beneficial in COVID-19 patients. So how good is that? I did not know that melatonin could actually protect against acute respiratory distress syndrome. I know it's a great antioxidant. I know it's a great brain antioxidant. I know it's great for sleep cycle issues, but I did not know that. So that was a really exciting thing. And I think that's a very, very simple, easy preventative strategy, according to this paper, that we can use. And I thought this was a really good chart, because it sort of shows us that what happens is you get the SARS and there's an immediate immune response. So our neutrophils and our lymphocytes and our CD8 T4 cells go down. So they're our major killing, our killing natural killer cells. They're in there for the fight. They're the ones that are going to look after us. But what happens is they go down and all our inflammatory markers go up. We get inflammation. It becomes completely uncontrolled. We get an increase in reactive oxygen species, and this is where the melatonin can work. But if it becomes uncontrolled, we get this huge cytokine storm, this inflammation. It's out of control. We then get the acute respiratory distress syndrome, and unfortunately, it can lead to these infected lungs and death. But here is where the melatonin in all three areas, so it is helping to reduce the inflammatory markers, it's helping with our reactive oxygen species, and it's helping with our sleeping disorder here. So I thought that was a really interesting, an interesting graphic to look at to see how melatonin might actually help us. So the paper goes on to say, we hypothesize that excessive inflammation, depressed immune system, and an active cytokine storm substantially contribute to the pathogenesis of COVID-19. So we have to, at all costs, reduce inflammation. We have to protect our immune system. Melatonin is not virucidal, which means it doesn't have a direct antiviral action, but it is anti-inflammatory, antioxidation, and immune enhancing. And that's where they think that the benefit lies. In previous respiratory virus models, melatonin caused downregulation of acute lung oxidative injury, pro-inflammatory cytokine release, and inflammatory cell recruitment. And this was done at a level, excuse me, of 10 milligrams a day. And so that's a pretty good level. Here's another interesting paper that looked at nitric oxide. And it said nitric oxide inhibits the replication cycle of severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus. So nitric oxide, as we know, it's a signaling molecule between cells. And when we get sick or we need the body to come to our defense, we automatically get an upregulation of our iNOS. And so, but when that's prolonged, that can actually cause a problem when we end up with excess nitric oxide. But this inducible NOS, or I like to call it inflammatory NOS, we need that to come to the fore when we have an infection. And it is this that actually has been shown to inhibit the replication of SARS. So again, we've got to be making sure that these nitric oxide pathways are working optimally and that we don't have this prolonged upregulation, because that's not really going to help us. If we have a prolonged upregulation due to Lyme or mold or whatever it happens to be, then the body's defense systems aren't as good as they need to be. So we need to be immune protective. We need to be reactive as far as the symptoms. We need to support the virus replication and do everything that we can to reduce it, like the melatonin and the quercetin and the other things that we discussed in the last 2 weeks. Now, someone emailed me and asked me about vaccinations and said that they were terrified because we are going to be all made to have the coronavirus vaccination, and we won't be able to leave our homes until such time that we do. I haven't heard that, but I did listen at length last night to the interview, the press conference about this that the CSIRO did with regards to where they're at with the vaccines. And it was an hour-long interview, and it was very interesting. And as I said, there are 3 different targets, 3 different universities looking at 3 different ways that they can attack this virus. They're only at this point doing their, they're about to embark on their animal trials, but it's still, you know, by the time they do animal trials and then they do phase 2 and phase 3 trials, it's still going to be a way off. It could even be a year. But I thought this was a very interesting paper. So what I would say to that person that emailed in is, don't panic about something that has not happened. Even at the end of the day, you will not be forced, I don't believe, ever to have a vaccination you don't want to have. Even when you consider we have the vaccination schedule, kids can't go to childcare, but no one is ever sent home from school if they don't have a vaccine. They're just sent home if there's an outbreak of a particular disease that they haven't been vaccinated against. I don't believe the government will ever go so far as to say we can only ever, no one can leave their house until they've had that vaccine. The vaccine, it's way too soon to say, A, if it's going to be effective, and B, there's 3 different companies vying for it, and C, I think before they give it to everybody in the world, they've got a heck of a lot more work to do. But I did think this was interesting. This was a paper that I came across that looked at the Defense Department personnel in the US during the 2017-2018 influenza outbreak. And what they actually found, that if they got the flu vaccine, sure, it helped prevent other flus, but it actually did not help them with coronavirus and the metapneumovirus. So you actually got a worse result if you'd had the flu shot and you ended up with coronavirus and the metapneumonia virus. So because they believe that there's this virulence factor, it says receiving influenza vaccination may increase the risk of other respiratory viruses, a phenomenon known as virus interference. Products inhibiting virulence factor to restore host innate immunity. So I think this is certainly concerning. If you, given that we are coming into our flu season, if you have the flu vaccine, you will definitely, they've got a new flu vaccine, you'll be prevented from having viruses, they say. But what this paper says is, for two particular viruses, coronavirus and metapneumonia virus, you're not better off. In actual fact, you're worse off. So I don't know what that means for you. If you always have the flu virus and it has protected you, and it's something that you want to do, then you'll have to do it. But looking at this paper, I would say for the average person that is not in the high risk area, like the over 70s, or doesn't have, viruses that they get every year, and maybe have comorbidities, maybe you have the flu virus. But for the rest of us that are healthy enough, I just don't know the answer. But I wanted to put this up because I think it is concerning, even if it's half right. And look, we don't know, all the circumstances behind this particular test, but they unfortunately gave all the defence personnel, 30 different vaccines against all the viruses for that particular flu season. And that's one of the things that they found, that it was protective against everything except coronavirus and the metapneumovirus. Now, is it the coronavirus that we have right now? No, of course it's not. It is, it would be SARS or MERS. So does that make it any different? I don't know the answer, but I think it's definitely something that we need to consider. So just to reiterate how we minimize risk. So one, we definitely have to absolutely be rigid about your isolation and social distancing. Don't take it for granted. And as I said, if you are going out and if you are going to the supermarket, I would be wearing a mask. And funnily enough, that's exactly what the US has now told everybody they need to be doing. If you are leaving the house, you should be wearing a mask. And I do if I go to the supermarket. If I'm walking down the street and I'm on my own and I'm just exercising, I don't bother. But if I'm going into a department, and not that I'm going to a department store, if I go into a supermarket or I go into a pharmacy, I am absolutely wearing it. I'm even wearing gloves. I know it looks ridiculous, but I actually managed to get some of those clear gloves, and I do wear those. We've got to be really careful at keeping our distance and making sure, as much as we would love to socialize, try not to come into contact people, or even just think, oh, look, I'm just going to have some drinks with some friends. It's just not worth it. Washing hands thoroughly with soap and water, or hand sanitizer, as I said, we could make our own, I think is really important. When you're out and about, really try not to touch your face. Cover your nose, and if you are coughing or sneezing, don't go out. And it was really interesting on the news tonight, one of the couples on the ship, he ended up with coronavirus and she did not, and she's obviously his wife. But it was really interesting. She was not staying in the same room as him. She was wiping all the benches and everything down with anti-everything wipes. She was not using the same cutlery. She was not touching his cutlery after he had eaten. He was coughing and spluttering. He had a a face washer or something that he changed every couple of hours that he was coughing into. It was put into hot water and sanitized, and she managed to not get it even though she was living in the same house with him. And I thought that's a really good case of how, you could almost be over the top, but she did everything she possibly could. And a couple of weeks ago, I had a cough, unbelievably, I had a cough. I went to a wedding in Melbourne and ended up freezing cold, and people there had coughs and sore throats. It was ridiculous. But I obviously got exposed to a few bugs that I wasn't used to, and sure enough came back with a cough and ended up with bronchitis. And of course, you can imagine everyone looking at me, but I did not go out. I really stayed at home, and thankfully I did everything that she did in terms of, I didn't want my husband to get it because I didn't know what it was at the time, but I was absolutely diligent doing exactly the same thing, wiping all the door handles down at night when he'd gone to bed, sleeping in separate rooms, making sure that I was wiping down the kitchen every night, all the covers. If I was preparing food, I had gloves on. So it doesn't matter if you're paranoid, but I do think we've got to do everything we can without raising our anxiety levels. So what I really hope this is doing is we're talking about it. We're giving you all a really good opportunity to think about how we can be proactive, how can we be preventative, and how can we be sensible and protect ourselves. Because my personal point of view is what we're seeing in the US, we may not get as badly, but it is coming, and we have to be careful. We have to make sure that we are as prepared as we possibly can be, because if it gets like the US, we have to be ready. Smoking is honestly the worst thing you could possibly do at this point. And anyone that's been a smoker, you'll know the impact that has on the lungs. Given the respiratory system and the heart are the two things that get affected the most, that's really a very dangerous thing to be doing. Take the support supplements that we're talking about and make sure the second you get symptoms, you act quickly. So what I've put together is your step one. So antiviral support, we've talked about this the last couple of weeks. We do the vitamin C, 3 to 5 grams a day. We take zinc. If you're deficient in zinc, you're going to need more, but I suggest 50 milligrams a day. And if you get an active infection, you take 50 milligrams twice a day while you're sick, and then you go back to the 50 milligrams. The MCN nasal spray, which is it's actually our mold nasal spray, but it is antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial. Use this twice a day to protect your nasal passages, because the virus is picked up through the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. I was talking to someone the other day, and everyone so far has said this is spread through droplets. But she said to me, look, I don't know that it is. She said, I wouldn't be surprised if we find out way later, because of how quickly this is spreading, that just breathing on someone that is not infected by someone who is infected could be enough. She said, I don't know, but that's my gut feel, is it could be that infectious. So if that's the case, then every time you come back inside, doing a nasal spray that is antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial has got to be great, because if it's clearing any of these sinuses, and this is one of the things that they actually found in aeroplanes, is why people always get sick on airplanes, is because the nasal passages dry out, and someone's coughing and spluttering, you breathe it in, and the infection or the flu or the virus, whatever it happens to be, collects in the nasal passages, and that's how you get infected. So they said that by using a nasal spray multiple times and keeping the nasal passages moist, and so that you can keep the airways going through, that reduces the infection. So the MCN nasal spray, the zinc and the vitamin C, they're on our website. They're also in the clinic. If any of you don't know how to access these, just ring the clinic and they will help you. We have an antiviral immune herbal formula, 5 mils twice a day. Every single one of you should be taking that. And I would also say any kids, you take it at the kids' dose. So we're saying 5 mils twice a day as a preventative. If you get sick, you take it 4 times a day. And for the kids, if they're up to, say, 10 years of age, you give them 2.5 mils. If they're over 10 years of age, you can give them the 5 mil twice a day. And for those of you that are often get viruses, then the transfer factors to increase the natural killer cell response is super important. So that's your step 1. That's what you should all be doing every single day. Step 2 is what happens if you actually get sick. If you have any signs or symptoms whatsoever, what do? Well, you keep on your vitamin C, you keep on your zinc, and you keep on your nasal spray. But then you add the cough, the sore throat mix, so that is 1 mix, and then you add the respiratory anti-inflammatory mix. So they're the ones that we talked about tonight, which we've seen that results from the China study show us that it helps stop the replication of the virus. Licorice, andrographis, scutellaria, baculompsis, rosemary, vitis, these are all herbs that we've put in our respiratory anti-inflammatory mix. And then melatonin, 10 milligrams, sounds like a great preventative, and quercetin, which again stops that replication of the virus, 200 milligrams 3 times a day. So that's your step 2 if you have any signs and symptoms. So if any of you need help, just ring the clinic and the girls will help you. So let's go over that once more. As your preventative, you've got your zinc, your vitamin C, your MCN spray, and your antiviral herbal formula. For those of you that are always getting sick or have a tendency to pick up lots of viruses, you should be on transfer factors as a preventative. Step 2 is if you have signs and symptoms of any of those signs and symptoms. So you keep on your vitamin C, up it if you can, zinc, MCN spray, but then you take the cough, sore throat mix, and you take the respiratory inflammatory mix. Melatonin, we could actually add melatonin to the step 1 and the quercetin to step 1. I'm certainly going to take the melatonin. I think it's, from what I've read, it's definitely a good strategy, and the risks and the side effects are minimal, if anything. So I think they're really good support strategies that we can do to be proactive and to be on the ball. Don't forget, we can help because we've made more appointments available. I've opened up my calendar as well. We've also got half-hour herbal consults on Thursdays and other days if you want them, so that if you are sick and you have specific signs and symptoms and you want a specific herbal mix made for you, just ring the clinic. I'll quickly sit down with you for half an hour. We'll go through your signs and symptoms, make up a mix and send it off. We've done hundreds of them so far for our patients. Remember, keep up to date with us because we're going to be having these regular sessions just to, the amazing thing is there's so much research coming out, even from the Chinese outbreak in Wuhan. I mean, it's quite amazing that we're getting this research already. It's fantastic. And as we said, if you are feeling anxious or depressed or alone, we don't mind. Sue loves to have a chat every day. Just give us a call, and we are here as a group to look after each other and support each other. So don't get stressed, don't get anxious, just ask the questions that you have, and make sure that you're looking after each other and you're doing everything you possibly can to keep yourselves safe. Alex, so we'll do some questions now. Alex said, I saw a video with a doctor saying it's not like pneumonia, but more like high altitude sickness. I don't know about that because all the specialists that are talking about particularly when we look at Spain and Italy, more so because we had more time talking about that, they will say they feel like they are drowning. And in a way, I guess I've been in high altitude, and you do get difficulty breathing in high altitude because the air is thinner, your everything works slower. Your lungs are working slower. You can't get the air into your system. So it is that labored breathing, which I guess is like high altitude. But for those that are more severe, I think if you were in that stage 3, that would be very much probably how it would look like, Alex, because it is that labored shortness of breath. Whereas the stage 4 is almost like a drowning of the lungs. There's so much mucus and so much inflammatory material being pumped into the lungs that the lungs just don't move. There's no capacity to get air into them. That's why they've all got to be on ventilators. Martin, proteolytic enzymes. Maybe. So for those of you that don't know what proteolytic enzymes are, like serrapeptidase and nattokinase and proteases, they help break down biofilm and help break down viruses. Maybe. Actually, Martin, I'm going to do some research on that and see if anyone has actually thought about that. It might be. I don't tend to use them for viruses per se, but I certainly do for any sort of gut infection and lipopolysaccharides, whatnot. But it's definitely worth thinking about. It's a good thought. Colette. Hi, Carolyn. I'm 28 weeks pregnant. Do you have any advice for what I can take to protect myself? I've been taking Armour Force Pregnancy, Eagle, Tress Natal, vitamin D, fish oil, iron, magnesium. Well, you can definitely take vitamin C. You can definitely take zinc, depending on, I'm not sure if you're in our, you're taking our MTHFR prenatal, but that's got a good amount, like 25 milligrams of zinc in it. Vitamin D, that's the right thing. We can make an immune formula for you that is pregnancy safe. Things like echinacea, absolutely no problem taking that in pregnancy. The GP wants you to have the flu shot. Look, my personal point of view is that there is absolutely no research on the planet, nor will there ever be, to say any of the adjuvant, whether that be mercury or aluminium, that they use in a vaccine to make it work better is safe for a developing fetus. I don't care what anyone says. There is no research on the planet that says it is safe. And until such time that there is, I can't in any good conscience advocate any vaccines throughout pregnancy. If you want to have a vaccine, you have it before you fall pregnant or after you've given birth. You do not have a vaccine through pregnancy. That is my personal point of view. I know a lot of people won't agree with that, but while there is no research to say any amount of aluminium the word is that the flu shot still has a little bit of mercury in it. I don't know if that's true. When I looked at it about a year and a half ago, it certainly did. I haven't looked at it recently, but they do say that it still does. Now, that may have changed in the last year and a half since I've looked, but I would not. I think if you are self-isolating, you are taking your vitamins, you're taking your herbs, and you are at home and you are staying safe, where's the risk? How are you going to get it? Unless your husband or your partner is going out and about and there's a chance that he could bring that home. But outside that, I just can't say to you, yes, I want you to have a vaccine through pregnancy, because I really don't. Chloe. Hi, Carolyn. Just wondering what your thoughts are on people with autoimmune disorders. Are we more susceptible to having an overactive immune system? Yes, and it really does depend, Chloe, on what sort of autoimmune. So if you've got autoimmune thyroiditis, or Graves' disease, not so much. But if you have a debilitating autoimmune disease, like you might have scleroderma or rheumatoid arthritis or something like that, yes, you would probably be more susceptible, because a lot of these people are taking drugs that dampen down the immune system. And so what happens when particularly people on RA drugs, rheumatoid arthritis drugs, they're taking things to down regulate their immune system. So what's going to happen when you come in contact with a virus? You are going to get hit harder. You are not going to have the defenses to be able to recover from that. But people with just autoimmune diseases like thyroid immune disease, psoriasis, etc., as long as gut function is good, I don't see why you would react worse than anyone else, other than you might be taking autoimmune drugs that are affecting you. I've heard astragalus is good for step 1 preventative immune building. Absolutely, 100%. And the reason that, and that's exactly what I have in my immune formula, is astragalus. So astragalus, echinacea, and manuka, propolis, they're in the immune formula on step 1. So you're absolutely right, and that's exactly what is in that formula. And that's from AABCAP Sydney. I'm not quite sure what that is. Oh, sorry, I pressed the wrong button and I got out of this. But that's okay. I'm just going to put our details up there for you. All right, let me just fix what I did if I can. So many buttons. All right, so we've got that back full screen. All right. Lee, hello Lee. Is the danger, Carolyn, of getting both the flu and coronavirus together? My GP said I could cope with either, but not both together. Well, this is what they're saying, that we are at the greatest disadvantage at this point than other countries, because we are going into winter. And someone was telling me the other day that the government is most concerned about this, and as a result, they are thinking of isolating us until the end of August, until we come out of winter. And I actually do see that, you know, there is a cause for that. I guess there's, you know, we can definitely say if you got both, you wouldn't be in a great state, particularly if you got the flu and then with your defenses down quickly picked up the coronavirus. And I think that's fair. But I think we need some more research to say what is going to happen if you get the flu and then get the coronavirus. As that research paper says, do you get the coronavirus worse? I don't know the answer to that. But I think it's probably fair to say that if you are in that high risk bracket, i.e., you know, over 70s, you regularly get the flu, you have you know, other issues, maybe it's warranted that you get the flu vaccine. I've never had the flu vaccine. I have been hit by the flu a couple of times, touch wood, not too badly. But I guess we're just going to have to take that on a case-by-case basis, Lee. I think you are strong enough, knowing what I know about you, if you are preventative and you look after yourself and you self-isolate, I don't see you as that high risk. But again, no one wants to get both at the same time, or even one after the other, because that would really knock you around. But I guess my point of view is, if we're supposed to be all self-isolating, and we're all supposed to be staying at home, then how are you going to get both unless you are mixing with people who have a chance of having one or the other? So, you know, I think that's where we have to be super careful this winter. We really do. Nebulizing propolis, ozone therapy, and lastly, HOCl for throat, nose, hand surfaces, and can you put in a mister for eyes? Okay, just tell me what HOCl is, if you can. So definitely ozone therapy, yes, fantastic. And I think if you can get your hands on it, absolutely brilliant. Nebulizing propolis, why not? It is a really good antiviral. And again, I don't know what HOCl for throat, nose, hand surfaces. I have got a fabulous mister what do you call it, vaporizer, that is also an air purifier, and I put essential oils in. So peppermint, tea tree, eucalyptus, what else have I got in there? Sandalwood, whatever you've got in the way of those essential oils. If you've got a burner, if you've got a mister, absolutely 100% have it running day and night in your home. Absolutely brilliant. And I do think it really does help. When I was sick a couple of weeks ago, I had it going day and night, and I really do think it was one of the things that stopped my husband getting this and really helped me recover quite quickly. Because you know, when you get a bad cough, just having that vaporizer going with some eucalyptus and tea tree does wonders for the respiratory system and opens them up, reduces the inflammation, and just helps you breathe. Due to oxalate issues, finding vitamin C can be an issue. How do we address this? Good question, and I've had a few questions like that. I've used, as you know, we've got our lipospheric vitamin C, a liposomal vitamin C called Lipo-C. It's in the website, it's in the clinic. I have found that the liposomal vitamin C seems to be super good when it comes to oxalates and oxalate issues for some reason. I don't know the mechanism of why, but I have found that my high oxalate patients seem to be coping with the 3 grams of liposomal vitamin C quite nicely. I think the secret with anyone that does have an oxalate issue is you take little bits more regularly rather than a super big dose of 3 grams in the one hit, if that makes sense. So much good info in this and last week's webinar. Thank you so much. You are welcome, Lee. Hashimoto's, yeah. So that's what I said. I think Hashimoto's, you'll be fine, because it's not as if you're taking autoimmune drugs to control the Hashimoto's. You're on a good diet. You've got good nutrients. You are handling it well, and I can't see why that would be an issue. Anonymous, is it okay to take alcohol-based liquid herbs if histamine sensitive? Has been suggested to avoid in the past. Like to know your experience with this. Yeah, and it's on a case-by-case basis. I think some people do deal with it okay. One of the things that does help, it doesn't help everybody, but it does help, is if you put your 5 ml of your herb into a mug, and you pour boiling hot water, just boiled from the jug, into it. It does vaporize a little bit of the alcohol out, and then when it cools, you can drink it. That's just a little tip that can help. The other thing that you could do if you are reactive is to maybe see if you can get some of the herbs. The problem with getting it from the US is we just don't know the quality of the herbs that you're getting. But MediHerb here in Australia does have practitioner-only non-alcohol tablets, and you may need something like that. But the problem is they're all out of stock. And I reacted very quickly with my herbal medicines, and I got in super, super fast. And I think I've got some good stocks to at least last all of us, 3 or 4 months. So I'm quite excited. But if you do have any reaction, you could think about taking some quercetin, which is a natural antihistamine, before you take the herbs. And we want you to take quercetin anyway. So that might be a really nice combination for you, to take the quercetin and the herbs at the same time. That might help. Doing the hot water on the top could also help. So that might actually take away some of the symptoms and at least give you the opportunity to take the herbs. I hope it does. If it doesn't, let us know. Just call the clinic. Lee, gratitude. Should we see you on a Thursday to get individual herb supplements made up, or just order from the store? So if you just want the immune formula, or you want the cough, sore throat, they are made up, or the third one, which is the anti-inflammatory, then they're made up, they're in the clinic, they're ready. And all you have to ring is say which one you want, or you want all three. It doesn't matter, we'll send them out to you. However, if you have symptoms that are a little bit different, because a lot of people are getting bronchitis, they're not getting corona. There are a lot of people have got bronchitis. Like me, I had bronchitis. So you're going to get slightly different symptoms, and you might actually have a wet cough and you're coughing up a lot of phlegm, or you have got, you know, almost like a whooping cough type, cough, 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 where it becomes really progressive. So we can make up dedicated mixes for you if your symptoms don't seem like you need this mix, or this mix. So we can actually, you know, we can actually make them up individually for you. From Biotech, hypochlorous acid. They're using it in many functional clinics in the US and overseas. I actually do not know. So let me look it up. And I'll have a look. Until I have a look at exactly what it is and what it does, I can't give you an answer. Oh, hi, Patience. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you. You can nebulize it. I don't know. Maybe that would be good. I'd have to have a look at that. All right, so I think I have answered all the questions. I hope you enjoyed that. Please keep in touch, because this is an ever-changing situation. We are getting more and more information, as I said, every day, and I really would like to share it with you so that you are empowered, you feel like there is something that you can do. We want to, and look, I've got to say, if any of you do have anxiety or you're getting depressed, please let us know, because we can also make you mixes for that. We can recommend supplements, because if you're on your own, it is actually a very anxious and quite depressing time. So I think we have to support each other. I think we have to keep in touch with people with FaceTime and everything else as much as we possibly can. But if you do feel a bit down, or you do feel a bit alone, please get in touch with the clinic, because we're here to help you, and we will do everything we can to see you through this. So hope you have a good couple of weeks. I hope to see you in a couple of weeks with another update. Take care of yourselves. Think about this information. We'll post it up and the presentation so you can refer to it. And you just give the girls a call in the clinic, and look after yourself and stay safe. All right. Bye for now. Take care of yourselves.